750, FM 99.3 KNSI. Another edition of Taking You Home with VoigtJohnson Real Estate. You can hear every Thursday morning at 7:23, Saturday morning at 7:50 right here on KNSI. Brandon Johnson is in studio with us. Brandon, good to have you.
Good to be here. Thanks, Bob.
What is new? What's going on? I hear we're talking numbers today.
Yeah, just want to give a little overview now that we're into September of 2023. Talk a little bit about, everyone asks, what's the market doing? What's the market doing, right? So I kind of want to just cover a little bit of what we've seen so far this year.
Okay, one of the most important things is inventory, right? And can you explain how that whole thing works when you say we have 30 days or 60 days worth of inventory? Well, what does that mean?
So what you're referring to is a term called absorption rate. So typically what the absorption rate means is how many months supply of homes are out there. How long would it take if no new homes came on the market? How long would it take for the existing inventory to sell?
Oh, sure.
Theoretically, right? So a balanced market is somewhere in the 4 to 5 months inventory.
Okay.
A seller's market is 2 to 3 months inventory.
Okay.
And really right now we're starting from the spring, that's number starting to increase. But what we're noticing, it's really the inventory levels are very different among different price points.
Okay.
And so what we've experienced, obviously spring was chaotic, hectic, very much a seller's market, and then it always starts to kind of slow down into the fall, which is very typical. Regardless of what interest rates do, it's just kind of the seasonality of our market to various levels, right?
Sure.
And we had a little bit of a slower evolving spring, meaning year over year, 2023 versus 2022, number of transactions were down dramatically through March and April, and we're starting to catch up here now. So to go into some specifics, in July of 2023 in central Minnesota, St. Cloud area, there was about 196 closed transactions. In 2022, there was 250. So that's quite a bit. You're looking at about 20% less transactions in July.
All right, but
we've caught up significantly in August. In 2022 August, the total number of closed transactions was 220.
Okay.
In 2023, it was 259.
That's pretty good.
So we're catching up. And so the overwhelming underlying theme is there's still a housing shortage.
Yes.
It's just at various levels.
Okay, here's what I wanted to ask you. A year ago, we were still looking at interest rates super low, right?
Correct.
Okay. That has changed dramatically.
Correct.
All right. So you can see that impact in those numbers.
Yes. And so what's interesting to me is obviously the reason why they raise the interest rates, right, is to control inflation and to curb it, slower growth, slower steady growth.
Right.
What's interesting to me is, and we've talked about this before, is the idea that buyers buy a payment, not a price point. So for instance, rather than they buy a $1,400 a month payment, not a $400,000 house. They say, what can I afford from a monthly payment?
Absolutely.
And whatever that equates to, principal, interest, taxes, insurance, that's where I go shopping from. Interest rates in the last, what you alluded to, since last July, last spring, have gone from approximately 3.5% to over 7%. They've doubled. And so the cost from a mortgage perspective on a $300,000 mortgage went from about $1,300 a month to over $2,000.
Yep.
That's substantial. That's about 50%. The true cost out of your pocket to own and maintain a house is 50% higher. Yet, we're still seeing homes appreciate in value. That's really kind of, I don't want to say surprising.
An anomaly.
What that tells me is it all funnels back to supply and demand.
Sure.
The supply versus demand is that disproportional that it is withstanding such dramatic interest rates.
If we could only get the federal board to understand that supply and demand, keep your mitts off all this stuff. That's just Bob Hughes talking, folks. When you look at your inventory, when you look at interest rates, when you look at supply and demand and all of that, what do you tell people who are out there looking to buy a home? Maybe they're first-time home buyers. I don't have 20% down. What do I do?
Well, there's lots of options. You don't need 20% down. My first question is what are your options and what where do you see yourself in the next year, 2 years, 3 years?
Okay.
Do you have some roots here with a job? Are you possibly moving?
Yeah.
Versus renting? Because really what it boils down to for a first-time home buyer is what are my options renting versus buying?
Sure.
And do I see myself here more than 12, 24 months? I don't see, no matter what interest rates do, property values, especially in that first-time home buyer price point, coming down. What I just alluded to is no matter how high interest rates have climbed, values are still appreciating.
Well, let's look at the exact opposite of that. Let's say I'm 45, 50 years old. I'm looking at my forever home, possibly a retirement home. I'm an empty nester, that kind of stuff. How do you change your approach as opposed to dealing with a first-time home buyer?
Again, it comes down to what is important to you, and it's going to be different things. It may be more of a lifestyle, amenities.
Right.
You may have substantial equity, so you're not financing 80, 90% of it,
Yeah.
which then, and that's more impactful. So if you're only financing 30, 40% of it, the interest rate is
Negligible.
negligible
It
to
is.
what your decision-making process
Yeah,
is.
and that's the whole thing. And we talked about this earlier. You know, those of us who have been around the block a couple of times, or 5 or 6 times, we have seen interest rates at 7% before.
Yes.
Or higher,
Yep.
double that again. I've been there. I've done that stuff. So for me, I'm not panicking right now.
No, and I think again, when interest rates come down, you're going to start to see. I think home values appreciate even more. I don't foresee prices falling off a cliff anytime soon.
Yeah, I love what you said. When you see interest rates come down. Very good. Brandon, how do we work with you? Brandon Johnson at VoigtJohnson Real Estate.
320-774-2400 or VoigtJohnson.com.
Start that home search at VoigtJohnson.com, and don't miss taking you home with VoigtJohnson Real Estate. Thursday morning, 7:23, Saturday at 7:50 here on KNSI.